Hello, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be here to introduce you Professor Nigel Brandon. He's going to give a speech today on bench to business. It's quite exciting. I'm quite glad to introduce you Professor Nigel Brandon. He's a well-known professor and distinguished professor worldwide on fuel cells, hydrogen, and electrolyzers, or, well, generally electrochemical engineering. He has received so many awards that I won't try and list those, and others coming. So let's just mention he's a well-known, distinguished, and working with him is a great pleasure and honor, and we can learn considerably a lot. So I wish you guys enjoy very much and learn a lot from this talk today. That's called From Bench to Business, Innovations in Electrochemical Technology for the Low Carbon Energy Transition. So remembering that electrochemical systems are to play a key role on this process, as we can use low carbon electricity, so electrifying systems to hopefully, and we need, not just hopefully need, to get to a sustainable future. Professor Nigel Brandon, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Tiago, and for that kind introduction. So let me dive straight into the topic of my conversation today. I'm going to spend a small amount of time just setting out the potential for electrochemical technologies, and more specifically, hydrogen as a low carbon energy carrier. And then I want to really focus most of my talk on two examples of where I've been involved in taking research out of a university setting and into a commercial setting. One relatively mature now, one that's growing, and then one that's actually very new, and we're just in the process of building that, forming that company. And at the end of that, just give some personal reflections on some of the challenges and opportunities in taking research out of a university setting, out of an academic setting, and commercializing it. So that's what I'm going to try and do, and then we'll have a little bit of time if anyone has any questions at the end. So this is the UK energy system, and obviously depending where you are in the world, the energy systems are different, so one has to bear that in mind, but I think there are some common comments that can be made. So this axis along the bottom here obviously is time. This data kindly put together by colleagues at the University of Birmingham in the UK. This is energy in gigawatt hours per day. And really the point to make from this is that when we think about the energy transition, quite a lot of people think about electricity, and that's important, of course, and it's going to be increasingly important. And in the UK, this red line here is the flow of energy is electricity, and it's got lots of little squiggles in it, and that's because we need to worry about those shifts in electricity production and demand over a range of timescales. But actually, when you look at the energy, and we've made great progress in decarbonising this actually with things like wind and solar. But when we look at the flow, at least in the UK context, the flow of energy today is electricity is the smallest part of our energy system. This horizontal line here is the flow of energy as liquid fuels. Essentially, today that means petroleum-based fuel like gasoline and diesel. This is the fall in liquid fuel supply during the COVID period where people were not traveling, but of course it's now recovering back to pre-pandemic levels. And one of the visions is to take this electricity as a carrier and start to use that to displace liquid petroleum fuels, so things like battery electric vehicles. And then the biggest flow of energy through our system is this blue line here, which is actually natural gas. So this has a very strong peak in our winter months, and that reflects the fact that most of our heat for our space heating uses natural gas, and the combustion of natural gas for heat for business and for homes and so on. And we use natural gas to make power, so it never goes to naught, even when the heating demand is low. So if we start to look at the future energy system, I think it's reasonable to assume that trying to replace all of this load with electricity, and you think about these peak loads here being extremely high, it's an extremely expensive thing to try and do. And it's going to be the intersection of electrons, which will, of course, produce more power by those mechanisms, particularly in the UK context, that means wind, but in other parts of the world, it means solar. But we're very likely to still need molecules. Whether we use molecules for heat, whether we use molecules for transport, and of course for some transport applications like long distance transport, be that aerospace or maritime, one can't really conceive of all of that being replaced with electricity. So we're going to need molecules, and we're going to need molecules for chemicals and other feedstocks. So technologies that convert electrons into molecules are going to be increasingly important, and that's what electrochemical technologies do. They can also convert molecules into electrons extremely efficiently. So my thesis is that electrochemical technologies are going to become increasingly important as we move forward on our decarbonisation journey. Now, I want to just talk a little bit about hydrogen. Hydrogen's had its waves of enthusiasm and its waves of pessimism at various times across my career. And I think that the focus today on complete decarbonisation of the energy system has actually brought low carbon molecules like hydrogen back to a subject of great interest. Of course, we make hydrogen today, we make it from coal and natural gas, and we use it in these sorts of sectors. So we use it in petrochemicals, for ammonia synthesis, and in a range of other applications. So we're using it as a chemical feedstock, not as an energy carrier. But if we're going to use hydrogen as an energy carrier, it makes no sense whatsoever really to make it from oil and gas unless we're going to put carbon capture on the end of that process, which is an option. But it also brings other technologies like electrolysis onto the table, where we use electricity directly to split water. This is a paper we wrote some years ago, which was just sort of setting out a picture, if you like, for the role of hydrogen in the energy transition. It sort of paints at a high level the sorts of picture we might have, where we've got blue hydrogen here. So this is hydrogen with carbon capture, which could come from a fossil-based feedstock, or it could come from a biomass feedstock. It comes from a biomass feedstock with carbon capture. Actually, it has negative carbon emissions attached to it, which is quite an attractive proposition. Or it can come from low-carbon electricity, like wind and solar or nuclear. And then people refer the renewable sources of power to water splitting through electrolysis as green hydrogen. Once the hydrogen is produced, of course, it doesn't really care whether it's blue or green. There can be some, there are some more impurities in a blue hydrogen made from these sorts of feedstocks than in a green, and that can be a factor for subsequent end use. But nonetheless, that hydrogen can go into distribution systems and be used, whether it's for heat and power, for the residential sector, or the built environment, whether it's for transport applications like buses and trucks and so on, or for decarbonising certain industrial processes like steel making and cement making and so on. It's also possible to take CO2 and hydrogen and turn that into methane. And there are some very credible programs looking at making so-called e-methane by those routes. Or you can take the hydrogen and combine it with nitrogen to make ammonia, green ammonia. So, of course, each time we go through those energy conversion processes, we're paying a cost, both financial and thermodynamic. So the efficiency of our fuel carrier will go down, efficiency of its production, and the cost of it will go up. So we have some trade-offs between the cost of making the fuel and the ease of using it. And those are quite topical subjects of discussion in and around the field today. But the simplest molecule to make is hydrogen. And whether we're making methanol, or whether we're making ammonia, or whether we're making synthetic aviation fuels, all of them effectively need hydrogen as the first thing you produce and put into that system. So there's a lot of interest in electrolysis. As I say, I'm an electrochemical technologist, so I'm interested in the electrochemical technology. This is quite a useful paper from a German group from some years ago, and it just paints a picture of the main electrolyzer technology. So these are alkaline electrolyzers, PEM electrolyzers, and the emerging area, which I'm going to speak to, which is solid oxide electrolysis. And this axis along the bottom is current density. So the higher the current density, the more hydrogen you make per unit area of your electrolyzer, and generally, therefore, the smaller the electrolyzer. And this is efficiency for splitting water. And obviously, we want a high efficiency. And we want a high efficiency because 60 to 80% of the cost of that hydrogen made by electrolysis is the cost of the power that's put into the electrolyzer. So efficiency is a very important first order effect. And then this is high temperature electrolyzers, which the observation, those who observe will note, goes above 100%. And we all know you can never get more than 100% efficiency. But this is defined only as the electrical input and the energy of the electrical input, and then the energy of the calorific value of the fuel produced. High temperature electrolysis has the advantage that it can recuperate heat into that process. So to get to these apparently above 100% efficiencies, we've discounted the value of the heat that's been used. So of course, it's never really more than 100. But electrically, it nonetheless gets to well into the 90% electrical efficiency, and that's a very attractive potential for that type of technology. So I want to talk about solid oxide electrolysis. Solid oxide fuel cells is the subject of the work that we're collaborating on here at the University of Sao Paulo, and an area I've been involved in for a fair amount of my career. So let's talk about fuel cells first. Fuel cells are a technology that take in a fuel and turn it into power. Fuel cells can do this. They're the most efficient way we can conceive today of turning fuels into power, and they retain that efficiency at a range of scales. So particularly for smaller systems, by which I mean systems, but perhaps below 10 megawatts, sort of 1 megawatt, hundreds of kilowatts to kilowatts, a fuel cell, there is no more efficient technology for taking a fuel into power. There are, broadly speaking, two types. There are some other variants as well, but the most commonly developed types are these so-called PEM fuel cells, and the one I'm going to focus on today, which is solid oxide fuel cells. All fuel cells rely on having a fuel at one electrode and air, most commonly at the other electrode, and then an ionic conductor. The PEM system has a proton conducting membrane. The oxide system has an oxide ion conducting membrane, though there are evolving technologies which are high temperature proton conductors as well, which are coming through, which are potentially quite interesting. But you've got an overall reaction, which is hydrogen plus oxygen goes to water, whichever way around you do this. But you can see that because we're having an electrochemical device, we're separating where we're consuming electrons and producing electrons by this ionic membrane. Unlike a combustion reaction, where all of these things are taking place in the same place and producing heat, here we can capture the flow of electrons around an external circuit. And not only will we produce some heat, but we will also have the flow of electrons, and those flow of electrons are power. And so we can directly produce DC power in a fuel cell. And that's one of the reasons, the critical reason really, why these devices are so efficient. And because they're not really a combustion process, they may have a little bit of off-gas combustion. They produce very low levels of NOx. They run quietly and at high efficiency. So this is why people are interested in them. But we have to remember that a fuel cell is really only an energy conversion device. It takes fuel and makes power. It's not in itself a renewable technology. Its carbon intensity depends on the carbon intensity of the fuel you're putting into it. Okay. Again, the joke in this field has always been that fuel cells are 10 years from being commercial and always have been. And there is an element of truth to that. But I am pleased to say that has changed in recent times, and you can now go and buy fuel cell systems, whether they're from Ballard or companies like that in the PEM fuel cell space, or Bloom in the US in the solid oxide space. Or Ceres Power, which is the company I shall talk a bit more about in a minute. That, for example, is a unit you can buy in Japan from Europe, bearing a Ceres 4.5 kilowatt Ceres Power solid fuel cell. So it's gone from being 10 years away to being here and now. The question is, how does as a field does it get to scale? and how does it actually have a material impact for the low carbon position. So I'm going to talk about solid oxide cell technology specifically, and this is my sort of 101 introduction to solid oxide cells. Broadly speaking, this is a technology set which has got three main classes. Here, the nomenclature refers to a fuel cell. So the anode is the fuel electrode and the cathode is the air electrode. If this was an electrolyzer, strictly we would swap the anode and cathode around, but the principles are the same. So this type of design here is so-called anode or electrode-supported design, in which we have the material that comprises the anode is the mechanical support for a relatively thin electrolyte layer of, say, 10 to 20 microns thickness with an air electrode on the top. Companies like Fuel Cell Energy and Solid Power are developing this type of technology. The next type of design is the so-called electrolyte supported, in which the electrolyte, the ion conducting membrane, is now about, say, 150 microns or so thick. And that has then thin electrodes on the air side and the fuel side. So the mechanical support is now the electrolyte itself. And that's the type of technology being pursued by companies like Bloom and Sunfire. And then this type of technology, which is the one I've spent a lot of time working on, has the mechanical support as metallic material, porous metal, on which you then have a thin anode, electrolyte, and cathode. And that's the type of technology that Ceres Power, which I'm going to speak about in next, is working on. So this is the kind of cross-section for one of these cells shown here in electrolysis mode. We have an electrolyte, which is an oxide ion conductor. It's going to be, you can see from the scale bar here, perhaps this is 100 microns or 120 microns or so thick. We have an air electrode. You will note that the microstructures here are different, and that's because we often have a high surface area air region close to the electrolyte interface, which is where the electrochemistry happens, and then, of course, a region further away to assist with current collection. And again, on the fuel side here, we have, in this case, two structures, a fine structure for the electrochemistry, and of course, a structure for current collection, and then another current collector on the top of that. So the focus of this talk is really then taking research out of universities and into commercial operations. And this is the patent we filed at Imperial College in 2000, so 24 years ago. This is the original patent for the metal-supported solid oxide fuel cell. And you can see that the design actually is relatively simple, but was the first time anyone had patented this idea of a metal-supported cell. And the work was a collaboration here from colleagues Brian Steele, sadly passed away some years, far too early in life, so 20 years ago, just over 20 years ago. Alan Atkinson and John Kilner and myself, and Bob Rudkin, who was a technician in the team. And came out of some scientific work that was funded by the EPSRC, or effectively the national research funding, one of the national research funding agencies in the UK. And we assigned that to this company that we decided to call Ceres Power. It's called Ceres because we use ceria as one of the key ingredients in the electrolyte. And so we took Ceres as the name. That was decided over a drink in a bar. So perhaps the level of work we did, but it's proven, I think, to be a decent name. So what's the story for Ceres, really? Because that's the theme of this presentation. So as I say, the IP came out of a national funded science project, and the academic team were effectively the principal investigators on this grant. And we formed a company, and I was asked to be the CEO. I'd not long arrived at Imperial College. I'd been in industry for 14 years prior to that. And I was obviously 24 years younger than I am today. So I had perhaps the time and energy to do that. Brian, who is really one of the grandfathers of solid state ionics, one of the key names in the field, was the technical director, and John, who at the time was head of the materials department, and Alan, who had a bit less, both senior professors were part of the company, but had a bit less time to actually run it. but played a very important technical role, of course. The university took a seat on the board, which is common practice, and we hired an external chair, this guy, Philip Holbeach, who had a very experienced financial background, and that's extremely important. One of the key elements to take away from my recommendations is that the team of people you build is absolutely vital for the success of an early stage company. And when you're trying to raise money, having someone that the financial community can relate to is also very important. So we raised £4.5 million at a time when raising money wasn't that easy. It was not long after the 9/11 collapse, an incident and impact on that. So this is £4.5 million for investors. So you're trading off equity in the business for financial investment. We also used a team of 3 students from Imperial College's business school to help us do the business plan for Ceres. And in fact, those students won the European Business Plan of the Year competition for the business plan that was Ceres's vision. And that was, of course, also extremely helpful for us in raising money, because you can't raise money without a plan. And 2 of those students actually were the first hires into the company. Plus, we hired some PhD students who were graduating and some postdocs. So to start with, it was kind of an Imperial College team. And of course, one of the challenges in building a new business is persuading people who are not from the university to join it. Because you also need experienced folk from industry. And there, you've got to really sell the vision for people to give up a job in perhaps a relatively safe commercial environment and come and do something much more speculative and higher risk, but hopefully higher return in a new startup. I was the CEO to start with. I did that until 2003, at which point we really needed to hire a proper CEO. So that we did. And very sadly, Brian Steele passed away, and I took on the CTO role. And then the chief scientist role, because by 2006, I can't remember the exact numbers, but we would have had 30 or 40 staff by then. And it wasn't possible to continue to run the technical side in a part-time basis. And then I suddenly was chief scientific officer, was an advisory role. And at that point, for various reasons, I parted company with Ceres. Now, the company listed on the alternative investment market in the UK in 2005. So this is, remembering that initial pattern, so this is what the cells largely still look like today. And you can see that they've become more sophisticated. They've got features into the metal support. And you can see here, the shiny silver color is the anode, and it's shiny because it's got the electrolyte on it. It doesn't have the cathode on it yet. And because these stacks, these metal supported cells, work at about under 600 degrees C, you can use a more conventional PEM type arrangement. You can bolt them together in these stacks and you can weld the metal support onto the interconnect. So you get a much more robust sealing system. You can have gasket seals rather than glass ceramic seals. So you get cost saving and flexibility. And this is what is now the sort of research processing line for the company, rather than the manufacturing line. And for people who are, and I won't go into this in this presentation, but this is public domain information about what the cell actually looks like today. And you can see it's still got this porous steel support, which is produced by a laser drilling process, and then a nickel ceria, a cermet anode, a ceria gadolinium electrolyte, and a cathode that's not disclosed. And indeed, when you look at the electrolyte, you see that it's actually got an electron blocking layer on it as well, because otherwise you end up with some slight amount of short circuiting because of the characteristics of the ceria in a reducing environment. And really, this is probably one of the key features. All of this effort is to make the mechanical engineering easier, right? And a lot of it's down to how you develop these seals and how you actually develop this current collection. And in high temperature solid oxide fuel cells, these engineering challenges can be significant. And if you can make those challenges easier by your material selection, that really is at the heart of the idea. So the story then is that having formed a business, Ceres did well. It grew rapidly. It hit problems in 2012. Because it was an AIM-listed business, those problems had to be publicly disclosed, and the value of the company really collapsed, and it went down to a share company valuation of less than $1 million. IP Group stepped in and rescued the business and invested in it, and I was asked to rejoin the company as an advisor, which I still am. And the prior business plan was one of developing an entire product in-house in the company to capture all the value, but you also incurred all the cost and the risk. And the new team moved the business to be a technology licensing business, and that's what it still is. So it partners with others who are going to put those products out into the market. There's been a sort of increase of interest in hydrogen technologies. I checked, and the current market cap is now $560 million. It has gone over $1 billion, but it's currently 560. It goes up and down as the secretaries goes up and down. And it's got major manufacturing partners, and it's a big factory is being built in Germany with Bosch at the moment. And there is a program to do high temperature electrolysis, and 1 megawatt solid oxide system has recently been installed in India with Shell. I won't spend any time on that. I don't think because of time. So there are a range of partners, and I'll just see if I can get this to work. Let's see if we can get this to work on here. So there's a YouTube video, but we can ignore the adverts, can't we? Will this work?
Yeah, with the stop force.
Okay. Okay.
More exciting.
Okay. Will this have sound on it? No. Okay. Okay. Well, not to worry. You still see the key thing is to see the picture, right? And it just shows you the scale that one gets to when you get to a megawatt. Right? These are no longer small bits of equipment. And this is the partnership with Linde and Bosch. And so people are welcome to go and look at that. Now I've got to work out how to get back to escape. Let's see, how are we going to do this? I'll go back to here. Back to here, then back to, yeah, there we are. Okay. So that, you're now firmly into the world of engineering as well as the world of materials. And the company listed on the main FTSE stock market last year. So at the university we continue, of course, so just starting these things is fine, but you need to continue to research and understand, and we continue to work in the field. We do a lot of work on electrode materials, and using these electrospinning techniques is an area where I'll talk more about in a minute, which we're very excited about. We do a lot of work on electrode structures, characterization, and we also do a lot of modeling work in support of this. So the next thing I want to talk about in a bit less detail is flow batteries for longer term energy storage. So energy storage is something that's going to be important to help support the decarbonisation of the electricity system in particular. And here I'm talking about electricity energy storage. And I'm specifically going to talk about so-called longer term. So lithium-ion batteries and related technologies are really great for storage up to perhaps 4 to 6 hours, perhaps. Certainly, as you go to longer periods of storage, they start to get less attractive. But a couple of examples of why that is no longer, is as we move forward, not going to be where all of the storage market is. And this is a study from California. And California will be very dependent on solar photovoltaics for its renewable power. And perhaps it's pretty obvious, right? But solar PV is active in the day and not active in the night. So this is a report from the California Energy Storage Alliance showing that really what California needs is around 10 hours of storage to balance this day peak with the night the sort of fall in demand at night. And that's been brought to home by this data, which I've just grabbed off a report off the internet, available online report. And it's about what's happening in Germany at the moment with a collapse in German PV power prices. So Germany in particular has invested heavily in solar PV, particularly in recent years off the back of the issues with natural gas provision following the invasion of Ukraine by Russia and the decline in Russian gas, which Germany was very dependent on. And this data shows you German installed PV solar power installations by year. And the blue here is the total gigawatts of solar installed capacity. And the purple is German demand load. The next slide shows you what that means to power prices. So this is the non-solar power price in the last few months. And this is the solar power price in green. And the purple line here shows you the percentage of the solar power price as a function of the power price. And so solar power developers are getting 13% of the value that non-solar power producers are making. So what that shows you is that if you can take this power when there is no market for it, you can help those solar operators firm up their power and sell it into this part of the market. And that's why energy storage for that sort of duration is of interest. Now, the technology we work on is flow batteries. Flow batteries are not in themselves new. They've been around for a while, and this is the one you can normally find if you're going to go and buy a flow battery today. So a flow battery has an electrochemical reactor at its heart, and then typically and conventionally it uses a vanadium redox couple, either a 2,3 redox couple or a 4,5 redox couple. That means you can change. Vanadium has 4 oxidation states. So when you want to store the energy, you can use this reactor, flow the solution through it, and raise the oxidation state of the 4 to the 5, and lower the oxidation state of the 3 to the 2. Then when you want to produce the power back, you flow that reductant and that oxidant back through this reactor, which works like a fuel cell and generates power. Now that works, but the challenge is that vanadium is quite expensive, so you end up nonetheless needing quite a high cost for the vanadium system. I mean, these systems, perhaps I should also just say, these systems are attractive for sort of 8 to 10 hours of storage, because if you have a conventional lithium-ion type battery, which say stores 1 kilowatt hour. If you want to store 10 kilowatt hours, you need 10 batteries, right? It's a linear scaling. Whereas in these types of systems, you have your energy stored in a liquid in a tank. And if you want more energy, you just have a bigger tank. And tanks scale non-linearly. So what you always find is that this type of technology will ultimately become cheaper than lithium-ion type technologies. The tipping point depends on the relative cost of the two options, of course. So we have been working on a new type of approach, which avoids vanadium. It uses a manganese liquid couple on the one electrode, and it uses hydrogen on the other. So it's a liquid gas system. It's a collaboration with my colleague, Professor Anthony Kusinak, who also is a collaborator here at the University of Sao Paulo. And we formed a company to take this forward called RFC Power, which we formed in 2018. And we have patents, core patents on the concept of this liquid gas battery, both for this acidic system shown here, but also for an alkaline system as well. So that's the core IP that's been transferred into the business. And Anthony and his team in particular have done some great work. And one of the challenges with manganese is that it disproportionates, forms this manganese dioxide, which precipitates, and you have to find a way to stabilize that, which we've managed to do through the great work in the chemistry department. And it works, and so that's all very encouraging. So we have two core patents, they're shown there, which underpin this. And we have a team of around 10 staff based in Imperial's Innovation Hub. And we're scaling this up at the moment. In fact, we've just built and are running at the moment our first completely integrated system. We're part of the Shell Game Changer program, and Orsted have chosen RFC Power as one of its technology partners, if you like, in terms of scouting out new technology options. So what's the story here? Again, the IP came out of a fundamental science program and the patents were filed by the university. Again, we had a founding team. I'm now the chair of this company. I have a lot less time these days than when we founded Ceres, so it's not possible for me to be more as involved. Anthony Kasanak is on the board, and Vladimir Uvit and Javier Rubio Garcia were two of the postdocs, the two postdocs that worked on this science program at the university and also part of the founding team. Though Javier has gone on to another industrial role, but Vladimir is on the board. We hired a full-time CEO, Tim von Werner, and he's leading the business. We raised seed funding in 2020. And actually, where we are now is we're actually in a Series A funding round at the moment to scale this up. And then finally, in the last minute or so, I'll talk about the most recent company that we're working on. So we've spent some years now being very interested in electrospinning and what electrospinning can do to make very high surface area materials, both oxide materials for things like batteries and fuel cells, but also metallic materials. And we were the first people to develop a process for making high surface area metals by electrospinning, and that process is patented. This shows you a mat of the electrospun material. This mat goes through one more step to actually form the metallic phase. But this has come back from a contract manufacturer, and it shows you what you can make quite easily at scale using these electrospinning methods. And our IP is all in the formulation of the electrospinning solution that goes to make that sort of material. So we're excited about this. These mats have potential application, for example, as metals in alkaline electrolyzers and so on. So we're just in the process of forming the new company. The company name is MSpin. These metals have 1,000 times the surface area of current metal foamers, which are found in these electrolyzer materials. And they actually also make very interesting battery and fuel cell materials. Came out of a PhD project from a very talented postdoc, Sheng Wang, who's now CTO of the company, and I will share the company. We've hired a CEO, Robin Francis, who has an industrial and commercial track record in the materials sector, and we're currently in the seed funding round. So those are the case studies, if you like. What might I take from this in a personal sense? So I think if speaking to an academic audience, we have to remember that spin-outs are only one of the ways to deliver impact. Licensing is a valid option, and of course publishing is also an equally valid option. So you pick and choose the right mechanism for the right, if you like, IP or know-how. I do think you need to have a distinct idea because there's a lot of competition out there. And not only has it got to be a clever idea, it's got to be capable of being protected and monetized. And we spend a lot of time at the university helping colleagues work out whether their ideas can be protected and monetized. I would say that for the individual, it's a very hard work, but you learn a lot. But you shouldn't go into it thinking it will make you money. It might make you money. And certainly I've been fortunate to make some financial return from Ceres, for example. But that shouldn't be your motivation. I think that's a plus. But hopefully the motivation is to have impact with your idea and to accelerate your ideas in a way that you can't otherwise do so. I think particularly early in a business, people back the people in the team as much as we back an idea, particularly in these deep tech type subject areas. And I think the other sort of thing to recognize is that you might start a business, but it doesn't mean, you're necessarily the right person to run it forever. There are examples of successful academics who make great CEOs, but there aren't very many. I don't think I'm one. So I think to stick to the bit of the process that you're best at is probably something to have in mind. And this is, passing the innovation along to others to make it in due course is something to have at the back of your mind. We've had a little bit of a chat this week about how universities can help. And I think certainly universities can help, and they can indeed hinder an academic startup. So there's a lot to, okay, thanks, Alessandra, for that. I suspect he's got to step off because we're nearly out of time. I think in general, I hope I've highlighted that electrochemical technologies are one of the areas that have a role to play in the decarbonisation piece, and that there is a continued opportunity for innovation. But here we're talking about devices, so we also need to bear in mind manufacturing and how we make things as well as what we make them from. It's an important area of research, and I'm very much benefiting and enjoying the collaboration with colleagues here at the University of Sao Paulo. So I'll close there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nigel. Now we'd like to open the floor for questions. We have a few other folks here, so please feel free to start and questions.
Well, excellent presentation. Well, part of the presentation, as I read, seems well, the final bit was really impressive. The new effort in terms of liquid batteries is something that, if you take that case, the liquid battery, apart from the price of vanilla that we are trying to replace, what do you think that are the main now challenges to be overcome to make them commercially?
Yeah, for that technology, yeah. So, I mean, the motivation is that the manganese, for example, is 1/10 the price of vanadium. So that gives you some advantages. It also couples to hydrogen, which is, in electrochemical terms, it gives you you're replacing a relatively slow vanadium reaction with a very, very fast hydrogen reaction. So it's more facile, so you get high power density. But also you could envisage a system in which you could connect into the hydrogen infrastructure if hydrogen infrastructure evolved. You don't have to have hydrogen infrastructure, but if you like, if you're comparing this to a fuel cell, an electrolyzer fuel cell combination where you make hydrogen and convert it back into power, if this, which is a round trip efficiency of 40% at best, what this device does is it converts into that hydrogen system and you can store power and then re-inject it, but it does it at an 80% round trip efficiency.
Twice.
And that's because it avoids the slow oxygen reaction, right? So in water slipping. So that's why it's interesting and why it might give you what we believe all our calculations suggest much lower cost. The challenge then is how do you get to scale? So we've just built our first integrated system, which is running at the moment, which is a completely integrated system. It's a few kilowatt hours of storage, and that's great. But no one wants a few kilowatt hours of storage; they want some megawatt hours of storage. And so, therefore, for a company like RFC, how do you get to scale? So that probably means you need strategic partnerships with industrial companies who can help you scale. And so those kind of commercial conversations, those commercial frameworks are therefore important. And obviously you need the money to drive that, right? So it's a funding question and a scale-up question. That's not to say there isn't continuing kind of underpinning science to be done, and there will be. But the proof of concept is there, right? We know it works. It's the key thing now is getting up to scale and getting up to scale quickly. So that I'd say is the major challenge for the business.
And regarding lifespan of one of those batteries, is there any concern about?
Well, so flow batteries in general have a pretty good lifetime. I mean, the track record in vanadium batteries is tens of thousands of cycles. Of course, this is a different chemistry, so you've got to pay a mind to that. One of the things that we've been working on is to do the best we can to demonstrate the fundamental lifetime of the device. And we're up to thousands of hours, but we're not up to tens of thousands of hours. So that's something you just continue to have to work on. So far, it looks encouraging, and there's no reason to think it should be a critical factor, but one has to pay attention to that, absolutely. So in all of these materials-rich systems, the lifetime and testing are critical factors, and you need to just keep working on it. And scale is a critical factor. And then how you move to manufacturing rather than making. How do you get to volume? Again, there should be no reason that that's a critical barrier, but you've still got to do it. So I do think that strategic partnerships are therefore one of the key factors, perhaps with a process engineering company, or perhaps with a large electrochemical technology company, or let's just to be discussed and reviewed. And one would hope that in a Series A or subsequent funding rounds, those sorts of strategic investors would come in. So again, when you're raising money, it's not just about getting the money into the business; it's about where the money comes from as well. That's also, in an ideal world, you want to get investors who can follow their money. And so those are other things one tries to look at in an ideal world.
Thank you.
I have a technical question. What is the operating pressure of the liquid battery?
Yeah, so the question is about operating pressure.
Yeah.
It's a good question. So on the hydrogen side, which is really, I think, where you're talking, you want to have some pressure because it makes the hydrogen store, if you're going to have a local hydrogen store, more compact. But you don't need very high pressure. So you probably want 10 to 20 bar max. We're debating at the moment the best way to engineer that. But that sort of size of pressure gives you an equivalent size for your hydrogen tank as it does for your manganese tank. So that sort of symmetry. And the higher pressure you go, the more price you're going to pay for that store. So we're talking relatively modest pressures.
Yeah.
So nothing too extreme. So gas storing it as 10 to 20 bar gas is the way to go.
Okay. Yeah. Great. I have a question. When we startup starts, I think that probably we have much more deep science being developed, but along the way to keep advantage, of course, I see that we always have to do innovation on the core of the device and others, but there might be a point, I'm just thinking about the history of the startup, where the business, of course, starts to be much more, the scaling up, and the system starts to be more of an issue. And so I'm trying to build, this pathway in my mind. It might be interesting to if you could share some of your experience. And as a dean of the engineering faculty, you might have further examples in your mind. So
yeah. Well, you're right. I mean, the science is key because it's underpinning and it's enabling, right? So if there is something, putting software type companies to one side because I think they're very different, but in deep tech type companies. Of which the ones I've referred to today really come into that category. You need some form of fundamental advance, which is giving you competitive advantage, and that most likely has come out of scientific innovation, right? That is a necessary but not sufficient metric. On top of that, then you need to bring in all of the other things. You need to take that technology into a technology as opposed to a concept. So that in this sort of area, of course, that means manufacturing, but in other areas, it might mean, other types of, if you've got a new catalyst, it probably means, how does it go into how do you embody it? How do you put it in a reactor? What is mechanical integrity and all these good things that matter? So you've got to demonstrate the key metrics that end users want to see. There's got to be some performance. As I say, being clever is not sufficient for success. Being new is not sufficient for success. It has to give the end user, the customer, a benefit. It's got to be significantly cheaper, or it's got to give some significant functional benefit. Okay, so so the company has to demonstrate that. mean, to be frank, the company would probably be delighted if no more research was needed because research costs money. But in practice, of course, it's never that clear, right? In practice, you're going to continue to need to innovate and continue to need to research. And assuming the company is successful, it's going to need to have new products and it's going to need to have new innovations to maintain competitive. Because as soon as you're successful, someone else will try and copy you. So you've got to keep ahead of the game. So there is always a research element. But when you look at the budget, the money you're spending on research should fall, relatively speaking, as a proportion of your spend. But of course, that doesn't mean it goes to naught. It probably stays at roughly what it was. It's just that other costs add on top of that.
I see.
Yeah, so the role of the research team changes slightly, but there is always going to be, I would have expected for most areas of innovation, again, software is different. You're going to need to, it would be wise to continue a research. And in all the work I've been involved in, that means maintaining a link to the academic sector. It means maintaining a link back to the inventors, who are ultimately the academics who are involved in having the core idea. But it's also important to remember that it's not the academics who are then necessarily going to run the business. They might be involved in running the business, but actually it may be other people who are running the business because the business needs 100% attention and it needs a complementary skill set to the research skill set, and therefore how you build that team is important. And in my experience, building the team is the hardest job.
Yeah, and probably there will be a point where the business and when you go deep into the need for attract further money and to attract strategic partners, then probably we need for sure these skills and then do these two connections at the same time, because then we build the team because mostly technical, and then we need the business to do both, right? So that we can attract appropriate partners to scale up, and also to give, as I mentioned, credential.
Yeah, so the team will expand over time if you're successful, and will have to if you're successful. Judging when to add to that, it's a judgment call depending on the area, and it does depend a little bit on the technology. So. But yeah, you eventually one will need a business person, right? In there, because you need to go and identify customers for your products. And as an academic, what do you want to spend your time doing? Do you want to spend your time going and meeting customers at the drop of a hat? Because if someone wants to speak to you, you go the next day. Well, it's tough to do that if you've got teaching.
Yeah.
So you have to think about where you're committing your time, and really you have to prioritize. So that's a personal choice, and depends on where you want to take things. As an academic, of course, as someone that's joining the company, so they're a postdoctoral member of the team, and they've got into the business, and they can dedicate their time 100% to the business. So. These things don't happen by accident, right? You need a team of people working extremely hard to make them happen.
Yeah.
And that affects 100% of 100% of people's time.
Sure. You mentioned one last question from my side, and please feel free to ask. You mentioned about the software IT, let's say, section. I know I heard that it's quite different, and that its success rate is also much lower. And on that area, how it is to, because you can patent like a software, but if you change it, there's more code, everything,
So my colleagues who work in this area, and I don't, right, but my colleagues who do say IP is irrelevant.
It's important.
So
irrelevant.
It's relevant.
Okay.
Right? It's all about the idea and the team.
I see.
And don't trouble us with patents, because patents are too slow and are irrelevant. This is about speed. And it's got nothing to do with IP in a classical sense. So that's what they tell me. So it's about ability to move quick and have the right people and have the right idea. It's a completely different space in which to innovate. And you're right, I think the barrier to entry is lower because you don't need the same level of capital. But we've had a number of startups, including student startups, that have been extremely successful within 2 years, 3 years.
It's really
Right, completely different. Bought by Google, bought by Facebook, bought by whoever, and in a way that you can't get that speed when it's a deep tech, materials rich, engineering rich innovation where you just need to sweat it and work it, and it takes a decade. Right? Different speed. That said, core IP in a deep tech is much more valuable. Yeah, because it's just the way you defend the position. So they're quite different spaces.
I think that the business part, partners, we think the team would be eventually, building up on the rationale that we are building up. I'm thinking that the business people, we think the company should start earlier in this or not.
Well, I think it depends what you're trying to do, right? And it depends on the experience of the academic, I think, and the team. At the end of the day, it's a timing question around adding value, and it's a timing question around time, but literally the time of the people. So in both of the recent startups I've been involved in, in Ceres, I was the CEO. I took the CEO role on for 2 years. And that was fine. And then we brought in a full-time CEO once we were further down the line. In the two recent ones, I haven't got the time to do that, and it was neither of my colleagues, or if they have the time, they don't have the experience.
Okay.
Because, with respect, it's quite hard for a postdoc to leave an academic role and be an effective CEO. There's a lot to learn. So you need probably someone with a bit more experience, depending on the individual and the maturity of the business. So in both cases, we've hired external colleagues with industrial experience to come in, and then they get a share in the business. As they hired, in the most recent case, Robin is a co-founder. So, and then it's a team, and we draw on his industrial and commercial experience, right? If you're out to draw on a contract, you've never drawn a contract before, and now you don't want to start with your own business for the first time, right? You want to put someone in there who's done it before. And the same with, and if you're raising private equity finance, you want someone who's done it before, because you don't want to be doing it for the first time. With your own business, I can assure you. So you want some support in these matters. So that's where experience comes in.
I see. Quite interesting. Looks great. I don't know if you guys have.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, everybody. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Nigel.